Folks, just before we transition into the next section, I think there's something really, really worthwhile thinking deeply about the stories that we share. We are formed largely by the stories that we share. And I wonder if where you're sitting, reminding ourselves that what we're actually about tonight is exploring how we change the culture of our churches. If you can make a note of the one thing that you're going to do as a result of hearing the little piece about stories. What stories are you going to share? Or tell? Or seek out? What communication channel are you going to use? What are you going to do to get that story and get it told? Please make a little note of what that action is. And what would be great is at our next gathering, if we could hear from 2 or 3 people what happened as a result of the action that you take. So could you make a little note, the one thing that you think, well, I could do this. I could go to somebody's frontline. I could arrange a visit. I could take my smartphone or my tablet, and I could ask those same questions. And maybe to build a level or layer of accountability, perhaps you would turn around to somebody who's sitting beside you and say, this is what I'm going to do. I give you permission to check up with me in 3 weeks' time to ask, have you done it? Because remember, we all have a role when it comes to shaping and shifting the culture in the churches that we're a part of. Not just the leaders, all of us. Okay? Again, if you can, you just need to stretch out your legs. Let's just stand up for a moment. Keep ourselves awake. I know it's quite late. If you need to do a few stretches, do so. Okay? Is everybody still with us? Yes? Put your hands up in the air if you're still alive. Still here? Excellent. Excellent. Take your seats again. We're going to look at our next session, which is about expanding the pastor-people contract. That sounds very litigious, doesn't it? But we're going to watch a short little video clip, after which there's 1 or 2 little discussion points that will hopefully prove fruitful in our own local church ministries.
We've already said that there needs to be a number of perspective shifts that need to happen if a church is going to develop to become a community in which whole life disciples are able to emerge. We need to have a confidence in the whole life gospel. We need to have a clarity about a whole life mission strategy. But we also need to have a conviction about the nature of the church. In the early years of pastoral ministry, sometimes people would come to me and they'd say, Neil, they'd use those classic words, Neil, it's nothing personal, but. And then they'd outline a whole litany of pastoral failure. Your sermons are dull, your worship is uninspiring, administration is awful, communication is dreadful, and then they'd say, but above all, and you'd go, what? There's something worse? Yeah. Above all, either this church is not loving enough or you don't care enough. And as a young pastor, I'd get really defensive. And I'd start to remind them and try and remind them of the times when we'd been there for them, the times when we'd helped them financially, the times when we'd cooked for them when they were in hospital, etc., etc., etc. But it was never enough. And I'd go home and I'd beat myself up. Because the truth is, for some folks, there's always more you could do. And then after a little while of doing that, then I'd start to write a sermon in order to berate the congregation that we ought to be more of a loving congregation. It was years before the penny dropped and I realised that no one had ever said to me, Neil, and above all, you've not equipped us. You've not enabled us to live as disciples. You've not envisioned us for our life. And it wasn't because we were doing it well, it was because it wasn't really ever seen to be the deal. The contract between us seemed to be clear for everybody, that it was my task to have a vision, and in return people would buy into that, but what they would receive as part of that would be care. Either care for themselves or care for their children or their family. And so we set up a whole pastoral care system in order that we might be this caring sort of church. But what if that's not really the nature of church at all? What if the care we're called to show to one another is indeed to one another? But rather than expecting care to be professionalised, it simply comes through relationship. What if the nature of church is that rather than being a therapeutic community together, what we are is an equipping, enabling community, a discipling community, a community in which transformation can happen, a community in which our rough edges are knocked off, our desires are honed, so that we become more in line with the kingdom of God? What if the church itself is a place where some of the shadow sides of our character can be confronted, where we can enable one another to understand what it means to live as a disciple? What if the nature of church is that it's this community in which we learn what it means to follow Jesus together, with people that we've not necessarily chosen to be with, but we've found ourselves together? What if it's not about comfort, but it's actually about equipping and enabling? I wonder what people complain about in your church. You see, the things that people complain about indicate what they think the central contract is. You only complain about what you think has been broken in the contract. Not everything people complain about, by the way, is wrong. They might say, actually, you're not enabling us to grow. You're not enabling us to grow as disciples. You're not giving me a missional perspective on life. I need that for my own life. But if they're simply saying, our church is not loving enough, is that an adequate enough complaint? You might want to take some time to reflect on this and how this is relevant and resonates with your own experience of church. And so there are a number of questions that might help you think through what the unspoken contract has been with people that you worship with, and the extent to which you're happy with that to be the case.
Are you able to see the questions on the screen?
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to work through that. But before I do that, just to say this, it's not a moment for griping about church or taking advantage of the moment to press forward your complaints or complain about the complaints themselves. You may be you may have a certain amount of legitimacy in doing that, but the purpose of this exercise actually is to try and get under the surface of the iceberg as such, and to begin to be able to identify actually what do people think is the deal when it comes to being a part of a church. And we have found that actually being able to identify some of the more common complaints gives us a little bit of an indication of some of the things that lie under the surface. So,
could you please read out those questions?
Yes, I have them on the slide, so bear with me a moment. Start with that. How's that? Is that better? What are the main complaints within your church community? And do they give any indication as to what the deal or the central contract is at your church? So I'll give you an example. For me, the complaint that I hear most is around vision, and people wanting a vision for the church and wanting somebody to lead the church well in a visionary manner. Now, there is a level of criticism there that is genuinely legitimate, okay? I can't deny that. But it indicates to me that there is something at work in our church that looks to the pastor or the leaders to deal with questions around mission, for example. And one of the things that I've found quite helpful is being able to identify that in advance and to come up with some strategies that enable me to change the topic of the conversation, not just for my own means, but actually to begin to speak to people about the vision that God would have both for His church and their life. It puts me ahead of the curve, so to speak. And not in a way just to be manipulative of people, but actually in a way we're genuinely looking to understand where are people at with their faith. And can they see that there is a bigger vision around mission and discipleship that actively includes them on their front line. So that's just one example where this exercise I find has been helpful for me personally. And perhaps it lands in your context differently. For Neil, it was in the space of pastoral care. That may be something that is closer to your particular church context. But what are the main complaints within your church community? And do they give any indication as to what the deal or the central contract is at your church? Again, I'll give you a few moments to talk that one through. And it might be helpful for the primary leader, whoever that is, to perhaps capture some of those in bullet point form for future reference. Okay?